A lot of oil painters say you can't get the same depth or atmosphere with acrylics, and honestly, as someone who paints mostly in oils, I used to agree. Acrylics dry fast, they're harder to blend, they dry darker, and it can be difficult to create a sense of depth within your paintings. But in this video, I wanted to show you that you can get genuinely beautiful results with acrylics if you follow a simple step-by-step process. This is the exact approach that I teach inside my art school, so I wanted to show you this so that you can see the real potential that acrylic paints have. So if you've ever struggled to make acrylic landscapes feel rich and dimensional, then this is a great place to start. So the scene I'm painting here is inspired by a place called the Tuki Valley in southern New Zealand. It's really one of the most beautiful mountain valleys I've ever been to. I went plein air painting here recently at the time of making this video, and I got some really awesome photos which I wanted to paint. So what I like about this scene is it's actually a pretty simple composition, and often the more simple compositions make for the best landscape paintings. So I'm painting on a 9" by 12" wooden panel, and I've just applied a couple of layers of gesso to it, and now I'm sketching out the composition using burnt sienna. Prior to starting this painting, I began planning the composition in my sketchbook. This is something I always do before I start a studio painting. I design the composition, I get a feel for the scene, get a feel for the tonality, the lights and darks in the scene, and I'll use the master sketch as a blueprint for the painting, so that's what I did with this. So once I sketched out the composition on my panel here, the first thing I did was begin painting the dark values and shadows first. So starting with the foreground here, the shadows in the banks of the river are pretty dark, and I used a mix of ultramarine blue with some yellow ochre. Now, I do this with all of my paintings, start with painting the dark values and shadows first. I just think this makes it easier to create a whole tonal framework in the painting, and then it makes it easier to paint the areas in light afterwards. And one of the things about acrylics is they often dry darker, so it's kind of good to get the dark values down first, and then you can see afterwards, usually pretty quickly, what the actual tone is of each of these shadows. So the general rule is we'll find our darkest darks and our lightest lights in the foreground, and then as landforms recede, the darks aren't as dark and the lights aren't as light. So I think the cool thing about this mountain scene is it shows lots of tiers of depth, so we can create a sense of distance in the painting. One of the things I've noticed about New Zealand landscapes especially is as the shadows recede into the distance, the mountains and hills, they tend to have this blue cast to them, and I've actually seen this in all sorts of other parts of the world. So to mix these shadow tones, I've used ultramarine blue with some burnt sienna, and the burnt sienna just helps to desaturate the blue, and then I mix in some titanium white to get the value that I want. I also mixed in a little bit of alizarin crimson, and this just gives it a violet tint. So these blue shadows in the distance, they tend to be a sort of blue violet. Now I included the snow shadows here, even though they're a lot lighter in value, and I pretty much used the same colours. I used a bit more ultramarine blue in the mix, but there's also quite a bit of titanium white and just a little bit of burnt sienna to desaturate. So I really had to get my values on point here, because the snow shadows, they're pretty light, but they've still got to be darker than the sky, which I painted later on. Now at this point in the painting, I'd established the darks in the scene, and you can already see there's some tiers of depth there, and it's already making it easier to paint the areas in light and mix up some of those low chroma colours that are in the distance. For these mountain colours, I mainly use combinations of yellow ochre with a little burnt sienna, some titanium white, a little alizarin crimson, but also a little bit of ultramarine blue as well to desaturate. So when you mix these colours on your palette, they kind of look like a sort of muddy, warm grey, but when you apply it to the canvas, or in this case the panel, it conveys the low chroma depth and colours of mountain grass in the distance and some of the other vegetation that's growing on the side of the mountain. So as I said, it's really important that we use low chroma colours for the distant tones in the mountains, and then it will help to make those mountains sit in the distance and look like they're far away. Now if I was to use really saturated colour, for example these greens that I've just started mixing here in the foreground, that would just pull the mountains forward in the scene and we just instantly lose that depth. So all the while, whilst I'm painting, I'm just keeping an eye on the overall tonality of it, so the lights and darks, the values especially, and just making sure that those are in check. Now, it doesn't matter if you don't mix the exact right colour, you can get away with that, but if your values aren't working, then you're going to have a problem and you could end up with a flat looking painting. So anyway, moving on to the foreground, and we got some nice rich greens here. When I took these photos it was spring, so the weather was warming up, everything was growing. It also had been wet as well. So there's some nice rich greens here in the grass. And to mix the greens here I use combinations of yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, ultramarine blue and titanium white as the base of my green. And then I also mixed in a little bit of phthalo green to increase the saturation, and also a bit of cadmium red light as well. The cadmium red light is just helping to make the green look more balanced and natural, because red is the colour opposite to green. If you're having difficulty with greens or they're looking a little bit out of control, you can just calm them down a bit by mixing in something that contains red. So this could be a cadmium red, which I generally use for the foreground greens, so grass that's in the foreground, but also you could use a burnt sienna or an alizarin crimson. Now the aim at this stage was to get the panel covered, and then I can start working in some detail. Now if you're enjoying this video so far, then I actually have a full version of this painting tutorial at my art school, and I show you how to paint this from start to finish. It's actually part of my Improve Your Painting in 7 Days painting course, which you can start the moment you join. It's designed to help you with the fundamentals of landscape painting and help you get a quick win within your first week. Not only that, but I've also painted this in oils as well. So if you're an oil painter, you can paint this in oils, or if you're an acrylic painter, you can paint it in acrylics. I've put the link in the description box below. I'd love to see you there. I also do live painting classes every week, and there's a whole library of painting tutorials there. The aim of the art school is to help you to improve your landscape painting skills quickly, so that you can create paintings that you're truly proud of, that you'd be proud to hang on your wall, show in public and even sell. Now then, back to the painting, and I painted the sky with a mix of ultramarine blue and a little bit of phthalo green and titanium white. Now at this point in the painting it was dry. The acrylics paints I was using were pretty much drying in about 10 minutes, but actually I really like the fact that they were drying so quickly, because it allows me to also paint a bit more loosely and just take advantage of that quick drying time. It's really awesome with acrylic paintings just to be able to just smash out a painting in an afternoon, which is what I did with this one. So what I was doing now was I was restating the dark values in the mountains, which is going to help to convey the contours and the ruggedness of that mountain. I was also adding some lighter layers of paint to the snow. So the snow on the mountains, I've kept it a bit tonally darker, and then I'll be saving my lightest lights until the end, and I'll be adding those sparingly to the mountains, and that will really make that snow pop. So I was just building up the layers, much like I do with oil paint. I was adding some lighter layers of paint to the side of the mountains here that are in the sun, especially where that mountain grass is growing on the side of it, creating those really low chroma colours. And then after that I was restating those shadows, and again I was using the same colours as I was using earlier, so ultramarine blue with a bit of burnt sienna, titanium white and a little bit of alizarin crimson. Now at this point of the painting I was starting to think about getting it finished, and I was working on the foreground here, especially the water. Just one thing I also forgot to mention throughout this video, most of the brushes I was using were flat brushes, and I was using a range of number 6, number 5 and number 3 flat brushes. These are synthetic flat brushes made by Rosemary & Co. They're called Shiraz brushes. If you want to get some, I've put a link in the description box below. Now I continued to restate these dark values, and again I was just using a mix of ultramarine blue with a little bit of yellow ochre. So this is really going to emphasize the shadows. Also I started adding a few dark shadows to the grass in the foreground, And there was also a ridge in the midground as well with a lot of shadows in that. So it was very easy to just re-add those shadows. So this is normally where I'm at this point in the painting, is when I start restating the darks. It's going to help to really emphasize the three-dimensional effect of the landscape and just convey more of a sense of depth in the painting in general. I finished up the painting by adding the lightest tones to the snow and the mountain. This was just a mix of titanium white with just a little bit of yellow ochre. I was also able to use that same mix to add a few reflections in the water, and I restated some more of the dark values, but in general I always save my lightest lights until the end. And then with that, the painting was complete. I hope you enjoyed this video and it inspires you to paint mountain landscapes. If you'd like to see the full version of this, then come and join my art school. And if you'd like to learn more about painting mountains, then check out this video here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.